Good evening, I'm Andrew Cheng.
And I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Tonight, reading Canada's COVID fiscal story aloud. Spoiler alert, the deficit's going up.
This is a recession like no other we have faced.
How we'll pay for it and for how long. The minister is here, and so is Rosie with that issue.
There was no way I could work. There was absolutely no way.
Plus, what's the plan for the women who have borne the brunt?
You didn't have to wait in line too long. The whole thing was 10 minutes.
Ontario looks to boost COVID testing in schools.
And the new craze for an ancient game.
Chess really doesn't know any boundaries.
How a TV show checkmated a global audience. This is The National.
Tonight, a stark picture of the costs Canadians will have to bear in return for nearly 9 months of urgent government spending, with so much more to come.
Yeah, that's right. Today's fiscal update also showed us the giant sum the Liberals want to spend to jumpstart the economy once the pandemic subsides. But here's the bill so far. An annual deficit of $381 billion, by far the biggest in recent decades. Much of that was spent to protect the health of Canadians, even as thousands died. One new promise, $1 billion for improved ventilation and training more staff for long-term care facilities.
So there's a lot more you will want to know about hard figures, government plans, and the opposition's view of all of this. David Cochrane starts our coverage.
The level of spending is unprecedented. The deficit is staggering. The job is unfinished.
This is the most severe challenge our country has faced since the Second World War.
To face that challenge, the wage subsidy is boosted again, back to 75% until at least March.
Mr. Speaker, this is a recession like no other we have faced.
And so new measures for the hardest hit sectors, loans for tourism and hospitality, direct support for arts and entertainment workers, rent relief for airports, and subsidies for small regional airlines. But nothing for the major carriers who are still in negotiations with Ottawa. All of this to survive the crisis, the promise of more to rebuild.
When the virus is under control and our economy is ready for new growth, we will deploy an ambitious stimulus package.
A package worth as much as $100 billion over 3 years to jolt the restart, winding down if things improve quickly.
This economic statement is another disappointment.
The Conservatives argue nothing Freeland presented will speed things along.
Canadians want their lives back. And this fall economic statement shows that they cannot rely on the Liberal government to get their lives back.
New Democrats say the biggest deficit since the Second World War doesn't spend enough to help working Canadians.
That light at the end of the tunnel now feels like a longer and darker tunnel. So given that, we've said that we need to see more help from more people.
The support and investments outlined in this plan, including our stimulus, will foster a resilient and inclusive recovery.
To help pay for that inclusive recovery, Freeland is proposing some tax changes aimed at the digital giants of the global economy. Amazon, Netflix, Google, even Airbnb, requiring them to charge sales tax on business done in Canada and eventually forcing them to pay some corporate tax. David Cochrane, CBC News, Ottawa.
Now, today's economic statement also took on the difficult challenge of helping women get back into the workforce. They've borne the brunt of the pandemic's economic impact because so many have left work to look after kids. Jacqueline Hansen looks at what one part of the solution could mean.
When schools emptied in the spring, the she-cession wasn't far behind.
There was no way I could work.
Gina Vivian stopped taking shifts as a home care nurse to look after her twin boys.
Each day I'm not working. Each day I'm not using my skills.
From February to October, more than 20,000 women left the workforce, whereas nearly 68,000 men joined. And women in two age groups are exiting faster, those in their early 20s and late 30s, the latter most likely to be raising kids.
We know that COVID-19 is rolling back many of the gains Canadian women have fought for.
One solution, Minister Freeland says, is a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system. Today, a plan to invest $20 million over 5 years to figure out how to design and implement it, with more details to come in the 2021 budget.
Canada will not be truly competitive until all Canadian women have access to the affordable childcare we need to support our participation in our country's workforce.
It makes a difference when you have lived experience.
Economist Armin Yelnizyan says the language in the update is encouraging, but the timeline not as much.
I am in a hurry. I feel that the moment is extremely urgent.
The government also launched a task force to help get more women working again, all efforts to reverse the she-cession, which Yelnizyan first coined.
The playbook for recovery has got to be different than the old-fashioned playbook, which has been simply shovel-ready infrastructure. We've got to do more to get more women back.
Vivian wants help. Trying to apply for a new job online after 15 years is unfamiliar territory.
My career is a big part of me, and it's not something I want to let go of.
A potential cost of the pandemic that's much more than a paycheck. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
The question of childcare and who pays for it was in the mix earlier tonight when our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, looked for details from the finance minister. Here's their exchange.
And joining me now is Canada's Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland. Thank you for making the time this evening.
Great to be with you, Rosie.
Clearly, as you articulated today, you expect this next period to be difficult for Canadians and for all of Canada and businesses, given that you have now prolonged some of your big measures even further and increased that support. Can you tell Canadians how the drawdown of that support coincides with the rollout of the vaccine? Are the two connected, and how are they connected?
That is a great question, Rosie, and they absolutely are connected. We finally do see real light at the end of the tunnel. We know now that this pandemic is going to come to an end, and Canada has the world's best portfolio of vaccines that we have purchased. So we're going to get vaccinated. And that means that we know while we have a few tough winter months ahead, spring is going to come and we're going to be able to get back to normal life.
You also made mention of a lot of stimulus money that's going to come, presumably once the pandemic is over or close to over. And you talked about childcare, a national childcare plan. You talked about a national pharmacare plan. Those programs would have to be done jointly with the provinces. As you also made clear today, 83% of COVID support has come from the federal government. How do you expect the provinces to pay for any of those programs, or do you not?
First of all, I really believe that when it comes to early learning and childcare, this is, a long-held Canadian desire whose time has come. It's something that Canadian feminists have been fighting for at least 50 years. And now, with the particular impact of the coronavirus, I think that there has been a real national awakening. And a lot of people have understood that early learning and childcare isn't only a feminist agenda. It is also an excellent way to spur economic growth. And you know what else? We have the example of Quebec. This is not just a theory anymore.
Yeah.
Quebec program really works.
I hear you,
So,
and I hear you, and I hear you trying to sell the program. I think a lot of people would agree with you. What I'm asking is specific, though.
Good. I hope they do.
How would provinces who have no money right now, can't even afford to deal with their own COVID emergencies, how would they be expected to pay for any of these programs, or is it going to be federally funded?
Rosie, before the Prime Minister asked me to serve as his finance minister, I spent some time working as his Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs. And that time has given me a real respect for the intricacies of the federal, provincial, and territorial relationship.
Right.
So I take nothing for granted there. And I think it is very important to approach any programs where the federal government and provinces and territories are working together respectfully to start with a conversation. And on early learning and childcare, that's what we're going to do.
Okay, so not really a clear answer then on whether you're able to fund it all or not. We'll leave it there. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Rosie.
And now back to Andrew and Adrian in Toronto.
And Rosie will be back a little later with a special edition of At Issue. Plus, we'll get answers to your questions about COVID and your finances.
Now, all that planning to help Canada's economy get back on track comes as the country struggles to contain the virus itself. Today, we learned nearly 7,600 more people have tested positive and another 98 have died. And from Alberta, a troubling number. Today, it broke another single-day record, adding 1,733 new cases. As Rafi Boudjikanian explains, with hospitalizations and ICU admissions also higher than ever, the province is preparing for dark days ahead.
For whatever reason, we were lucky.
Talana Hargreaves' entire family caught COVID-19. They're almost fully recovered now, but there were some scary moments.
My 11-year-old son commented that it felt like his bones were hollow.
Hargreaves says they took all the precautions they could, but caught it anyway.
We know it was from a classroom school outbreak.
She's thankful none of them were sick enough to be admitted to hospital. The same can't be said for more than 450 Albertans who are hospitalized with COVID right now, nearly 100 of them in intensive care. That's the most so far. Some are already double bunked in a single room. It all has the province preparing to more than double its capacity to 425 ICU beds. But doctors warn more staff will be needed too.
It's one thing to imbue people with skills and protocols. It's another thing to give them the experience to actually be able to manage people with this complexity. It's disrupting the entire way that a normal system that functions well works.
The province is hoping that planning is just a precaution.
Hope it is not necessary, and ultimately that's up to Albertans to respond positively to both the restrictions and guidelines articulated by the government last week.
There's no doubt that the hospital system is under significant strain.
But public health insists it will be able to handle hospitalization and ICU patient increases, though that may mean further pushing back wait times for other surgeries and procedures. Talana Hargreaves' family, though, is not taking chances.
If we can lead by example and just say, hey, we're going to keep you guys safe, even if you're not as worried, then we have to do that.
That means this Christmas, they won't be seeing anybody else. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Edmonton.
Now, British Columbia is reporting its deadliest pandemic stretch. Since Friday, 46 people died of COVID-19 in that province.
About 80% of these people were people who lived in long-term care. If you are thinking that it may be okay to bend the rules, please remember that this virus takes lives.
November now accounts for 40% of the province's 441 total deaths. BC also added more than 2,300 new cases over the weekend.
5 Ontario public health regions are seeing increased restrictions today as their COVID cases rise. Windsor-Essex is going into the red zone while Haldimand-Norfolk heads into orange. Today, Ontario reported more than 1,700 new COVID cases. Toronto broke a record, adding 622. And so Toronto is one of a few Ontario hotspots where some schools are trying a new COVID strategy, offering a test to everyone, symptoms or no symptoms. As Deanna Sumnak-Johnson tells us, the first school is already seeing a jump in positive cases.
Of more than 400 students tested since Thursday at this Toronto school, 19 tested positive. Children in 14 classes are in isolation. Among them, this man's son, who tested negative.
My son's class, they stopped it. Only my daughter today going to school.
The pilot project lets students without symptoms get in-school testing if they're in COVID hot zones of Toronto, Peel, York, or Ottawa, and if their schools are designated as high risk.
Great idea. You didn't have to wait in line too long. The whole thing was 10 minutes.
The education minister says the province won't be closing schools, but his new plan may be an acknowledgement that the numbers could be growing.
The plan in place is working hard to mitigate any further spread, identifying COVID cases, isolating them.
This safe school advocate says it's too little too late.
So we support this pilot, obviously, but we think that, it should have come a lot weeks and weeks ago, and it needs to be expanded.
It's enlightening to see this data.
This expert cautions that the test being used is very sensitive.
we're doing PCR testing in these children, which will pick up not only kids that are infectious, but may pick up some kids that were infectious 2, 4, 6 weeks ago in that sense. And so all of that is going to get incorporated into this testing.
Imperfections and inconveniences aside, parents in the designated schools approve if these measures keep schools open.
It's really hard on the kids. It's a very stressful environment just to be at home. They really miss school.
The pilot project is scheduled to last for 4 weeks. No word yet on whether it will be expanded to more schools in the new year. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, vaccine maker Moderna took a major step today, asking U.S. regulators to allow emergency use of its COVID-19 vaccine. It's planned to do the same in Europe as well after full trial results came in on the weekend. So with the important caveat that the data is yet to be peer-reviewed or given the thumbs up by Health Canada, the results suggested the vaccine was 94% effective, consistent across various ages, ethnicities, and genders. And within the study, not one of the people who fell severely ill were in the vaccine group. Canada has secured 20 million doses of the vaccine with an option to buy another 36 million. And we've been getting lots of questions from you about vaccines, and tomorrow we're going to aim to answer them in a national virtual town hall. We'll also put your questions on lockdowns, the holidays, and your health to a panel of infectious diseases and healthcare experts.
How long do we think it's going to take for a significant portion of the population to get vaccinated?
Am I allowed to see my family for Christmas?
Live and interactive, this special event begins tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. You can catch it on CBC News Network, CBC Gem, and the CBC News app.
All right, as BC battles a pandemic and an opioid crisis, a scathing new report has found its healthcare system rife with racism and discrimination against Indigenous people. Briar Stewart has the details and the response.
I really miss her.
Debbie Kuhn died in 2008. An inquest found she suffered from a head injury, but her niece said healthcare staff first presumed something else.
Every single one of them looked at her and saw her as a drunk Indian that needed to sober up. And she didn't get the proper assessment. She didn't get the proper treatment she needed that could save her life.
One example of what a new report calls widespread racism in the healthcare system, which is leading to worse outcomes for Indigenous patients.
Literally, the report includes multiple comments that I heard of people saying, I would rather die and not get the needed healthcare treatment than go back into that system and get it.
A former judge was asked to investigate after BC hospital staff were accused of playing a game which involved guessing the blood alcohol content of Indigenous patients. She found those allegations were unsubstantiated, but heard about plenty of other problems. Thousands were surveyed. Among the findings, 84% of Indigenous people reported experiencing racism or discrimination in the healthcare system. More than half of Indigenous healthcare workers said they experienced the same while on the job.
The report laid out 24 recommendations. It called for better support for those who speak up about racism. It said there needs to be more training and schools should do more to recruit Indigenous students into healthcare programs.
If we can change the way the system is currently working and bring anti-racism measures into place, then hopefully we'll see an improvement in health status of Indigenous people.
The BC government offered an apology today.
Racism is toxic for people, and it's toxic for care.
Officials promised to move quickly on the recommendations, particularly because lives are at stake now, as the pandemic and the opioid crisis are disproportionately affecting Indigenous people. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, a BC man says he's lucky to be alive after his pickup truck was smashed into by a snowplow.
Listen live or on demand whenever you like.
Holy smokes, look at that. The Dashcam video has been shared thousands of times online. Investigators say the plow caught some ice, causing it to cross the center lane. The impact caused the pickup to fly into the air before landing upside down in a nearby ditch. Now, incredibly, the driver walked away with minor injuries.
In the trial of the driver of a van who killed 10 people on a Toronto street, testimony today built on a provocative defense that Alec Manassian wasn't criminally responsible and that his autism had something to do with this. Joanna Miliotis was there.
The attempt to explain the state of mind of an admitted killer hinges on a controversial question. When Alec Manassian drove a van into pedestrians, did his autism leave him unable to tell right from wrong? That question terrifies Alex Ekovitz.
It makes me want to crawl under a rock because, my God, there's people out there who think that my being autistic makes me susceptible to being a mass murderer.
Ekovitz is a former classmate of Manassian's and is an autistic activist who says the ongoing outrage is fueled by facts, that autistic people tend to be victims, not perpetrators of violence.
Murder is not okay. If he doesn't understand those things, it's not his autism that's causing him to not understand them.
After his arrest, Manassian told police he was inspired by hateful ideology against women, but also gave contradictory statements to psychiatric experts who also spoke to him, including the defense's key witness. Dr. Alexander Westphal is a forensic psychiatrist from Yale University who specializes in autism. He testified Manassian displayed classic signs of the disability, including impaired social skills, but most striking was his lack of empathy, a disconnect to the consequences of his devastating actions. But advocacy groups say tying that to autism is dangerous and damaging.
We've received an inordinate spike in calls to our call center. What do I tell my child? That autism is not equal to criminality or the incapacity to make a moral distinction.
Westphal told the court his testimony relates to Manassian's autism and is not a general statement about the disorder. Court will hear more from him tomorrow and more of the defense's argument that Manassian can't tell the moral difference between right and wrong. Joanna Miliotis, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, tonight we got a glimpse at what this pandemic could cost the Canadian government.
This is a recession like no other we have faced.
What is the plan?
Ahead tonight, at issue on the political bottom line to a staggering deficit and unprecedented spending.
And a quiet moment of comfort in the age of COVID-19. The story behind this photo.
It's your game.
And the unlikely Netflix hit igniting new interest in a very old game.
Checkmate. Boom.
We're back in 2.
I'm David Yeaman, President of Molded Precision Components here in Oro-Medonte. When the pandemic hit, we were manufacturing automotive components and venturing into medical. When the automotive went to virtually zero overnight, we retooled and we developed new facilities to help supply Canada's PPE needs. We partnered with Sterling Industries, the federal and provincial government, and we developed Shield U, a Class 1 medical device face shield, and manufactured 27 million face shields to support Canada's frontline workers. And we donated 25,000 to our communities. And all of that led to this. Canada's first advanced manufacturing medical innovation park, 83 acres of company collaboration to permanently establish Canadian capacity to supply Canada's health security needs for Canadians and by Canadians. And what makes me truly hopeful for the future is seeing how Canadians all pull together during this crisis. The public, industry, and government all collaborating and innovating together to fight this fight together. And this park is evidence of that. And by the way, we're still making automotive components.
So just a snapshot of how one Canadian, David Yeaman, has managed to make his business work even in a pandemic. But lots of folks still have questions about their finances. And so in the next 3 minutes, we're going to try and answer 3 that we have received with the help of personal finance expert Preet Banerjee. Hello to you, sir. Let's get right to it. Our first question comes in from Roman Abbas. Have a listen.
Hi, my name is Roman, and I live in Toronto, Ontario. My question is that how can I save money for school since there are limited job opportunities right now? Thank you.
Okay, so help for students. What do you think?
Yeah, so he's talking about limited job opportunities, and there are a couple of options that I think more people should be exploring. So the job bank is actually where you can find a lot of the jobs, and a lot of those jobs were created because of the Canada Summer Student Job Program, which was expanded. And so there are a lot of opportunities there, and I see that they keep on posting jobs every day. There are other sites like, for example, Upwork. So as an example, I have personally hired people for small or even longer term tasks for things like data processing, or even students for help with projects on, for example, qualitative research for different projects that are worked on. So make sure you're exploring those two avenues. And then, as was mentioned today, there is also, a continuing of the doubling of the Canada student grants, which can be worth $6,000 in grants that you don't have to pay back as well. So make sure you're looking at all those benefits that are available too.
Okay, the next question we have comes from Christopher C. from Barrie, Ontario, asking, should I use a CPA, so get professional help to do my taxes? I'm wanting to make sure I claim everything now that I work at home. And so maybe you can tackle that in reverse order. I mean, what can a person who works from home claim? And then, should they seek professional help?
Yeah, so there's a lot of credits and deductions that can be available. And again, in the economic update, I think they mentioned that there was a new home office expense credit that can be claimed, which is about $400 as well. So because there are so many of these credits and deductions, it can be overwhelming for a lot of people. So the choice of whether you do your own taxes or you use an accountant to help you is one that a lot of people face. So what I would suggest to a lot of people is it's not just about whether or not you can complete the taxes, it's also about whether or not you want to deal with the hassle of doing it. So you can, in some cases, do both at the same time. So you can fill out your own return and maybe 1 year or two use an accountant. And if the numbers match, you know that you're doing a good job, and then you can determine, is it worth the hassle to have someone else do it for me, or do I want to do it myself?
Right. I've got about 15 seconds left for this last question. It comes from Christy Anderson in Calgary. Should we be prepared for an economic depression after? What do you think?
Okay, so 15 seconds, I'm going to say no. If you compare it to the Great Depression, there's so many things that we have now that we didn't, but we learned from the Great Depression. And we had things like, robust employment insurance. We have better monetary policy. We have better oversight of our financial institutions. So for that reason, no, I don't think you have to worry about a depression.
Preet Banerjee, you've been very helpful. Personal finance expert. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Next, the push to go green at one of Canada's busiest transit systems. We go behind the scenes for a look at what could be key in Canada's zero emissions plan.
Just can also be beautiful.
And later, the hit show breathing new life into an old game. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Today's fiscal update included some measures to reduce carbon emissions, helping homeowners on energy-efficient upgrades, investing in electric vehicle infrastructure like charging stations, and helping electrify public transit systems. Not a lot of specifics, but Tashana Reid looks at what cities are already doing.
It's like plugging in a phone. After 3.5-hour charge, this electric bus is ready to go. A much smoother and quieter ride for bus driver Kumari Moody.
You could sneak up on people and they wouldn't know. Sometimes you gotta honk to get their attention at the stop.
This electric bus is one of 3 models being tested out by the Toronto Transit Commission. The TTC boasts the largest electric bus fleet in North America. 59 buses with 1 more on the way.
It's energy efficient, which is good. When I can leave it on and not have to worry about emissions.
The TTC says its fleet will be fully electric by the year 2050.
We'd be reducing emissions by about 150 tons of greenhouse gases per year per bus.
Plus, fuel savings from $50 to $70 million each year.
I think all of the transit agencies are starting to see what we're seeing is the broader benefits, local air quality I mentioned, the potential cost savings.
But going electric isn't cheap. Buses can cost upwards of $1.2 million. That's $500,000 more than diesel buses. And there's the cost of charging infrastructure. Still,
there's these 3 motivations, getting rid of smog, getting rid of congestion, and solving the climate issue through transportation electrification. Those 3 things motivated a lot of cities to commit to zero emissions by 2040 and 2050. They're not backing down.
This researcher says electric buses need to be part of the equation if Canada plans to meet its climate targets.
It's about finding a trade-off between support for public transit infrastructure, support for electric vehicle infrastructures, and helping people afford them when they can.
The federal government says it plans to have 5,000 electric buses on Canadian roads by 2024. But there's a long journey ahead. Tashana Reid, CBC News, Toronto.
And sticking with the fiscal update, Rosie's next with a special ad issue.
And we're going to talk about the political messaging in this economic update, how the government is planning for an uncertain future. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea will join all of us after the break. Almost 10 months into an unprecedented health and economic crisis, the federal government delivered its first detailed fiscal update since the start of the pandemic. Also a first for Chrystia Freeland as finance minister.
This fall economic statement outlines the Government of Canada's measures to fight and defeat COVID-19, to support Canadians through this crisis, and to rebuild Canada's economy once the virus is beaten.
A post-pandemic recovery plan that includes a stimulus package of up to $100 billion. All this as the deficit for this fiscal year is now projected to reach a record $381 billion. All right, so what political message did the government send today? Let's bring in At Issue for a special Monday edition. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. I'm going to start with you, Althea. I think there was more here than I was expecting. It seemed almost like a mini budget. What message do you think the government was trying?
Budget.
Yeah, what do you think the government was trying to send here with this?
Well, two things. One, that they're making, or at least they want to try to appear to be making good on many of their promises. Two, they're doing a lot of defensive moves in terms of electoral constituencies that they're reaching out to. You think of women, of racialized Canadians, students. They're trying to calm anger among some small business owners with many of their plans. A lot of the things are, we hear you, there are things coming, so hold your breath. So there's a lot of defensive moves. And you were I was caught aback, frankly, by the NDP's response. You know, they were saying that this was an austerity budget. This is anything but an austerity budget. $381 billion deficit. There's more than $270 billion in extra spending over the next 5 years. Never mind the $70 to $100 billion in unnamed stimulus that is going to appear in the next 3 years, possibly. More details on that coming soon. So to me, this is like an election prep budget.
What did you make of it, Chantal?
Well, it's also anything but a real plan. There's promises or smoke signals. We're going to deliver the fire later. But it's very much a COVID-related document. So on the first part of Chrystia Freeland's announcement, it does live up to that. On the third part, a plan for the post-COVID economic recovery. Not only do I think it's wait till the budget, but it also sounds like wait till after we've obtained a mandate from Canadians in an election.
I mean, it is hard to deal with a second wave and plan a recovery. I don't know if they could have gotten away with not putting some of those, as Chantal aptly calls them, smoke signals in there, Andrew.
Well, I find it baffling to call this a mini budget. I think this was more designed to buy time until the real budget by putting as little into this as possible in terms of hard specifics. So even the deficit for this year, it's plus or minus about $15 billion. The deficit for years coming out is plus or minus 50. The debt itself is plus or minus 100. There's a lot of plans to make plans. They're going to announce something. They say, well, we'll give you the details later, or we'll tell you what we're going to spend it on, or how much we're going to spend on it. Stay tuned. But everything gets put off until after something else. So we'll get the stimulus after they've finished fighting the COVID. They'll get the fiscal guardrails after they've finished the stimulus, although we don't know exactly what those will mean or what kind of schedule, et cetera. And we'll get the fiscal anchors after we've had the fiscal guardrails. So I think this is mostly designed so that they could say something without actually giving away what they really want to do, which is to set everything up for the budget and have the big fight with the opposition over the budget.
How much of that is to be expected, though, Althea, I guess is my point. I mean, perhaps the second wave is not perhaps, it's hitting us harder than we probably expected. So I wonder how much realistically can be expected.
Well, I agree with Andrew on like the plan to make a plan, on the stimulus, on the guardrails, on the anchors. I didn't expect that there was going to be any of that in this budget, though. I feel like they are trying to signal that they know that those are things that they should be concerned with. And so they're saying we're going to be concerned with them, but we're going to be concerned with them later. On some things, I'm not surprised that there is no plan. I think from a communication standpoint, you do want to like drag this out as long as possible so that you can make targeted press conferences and local news headlines and certain targeted seats and areas, because what this is also a very like regionally specific budget. The fact that in this budget, they decide that they're going to create a new regional development agency for British Columbia. Like there's so much packed into this that you can't read this and not think like, oh, they want to go in the spring. And if they don't want to go in the spring, then at least there's enough there for them to point the finger and say, well, see, look at these other parties. They prevented you from having all these goodies that we packed into this budget.
Sure. Chantal, you want in?
Yeah, but that doesn't make it a budget. It makes it a political document that keeps the government on its toes to fight an election, which is an entirely different matter. Your question was it inevitable? Yes, up to a point. We are still in the midst of this second wave. I heard a lot of criticism from the opposition. I did not get a sense that any of them were trying to translate their criticism into a non-confidence motion and a winter election. No. But it is more of a political document than a serious plan of anything, and I would not call it a budget.
Okay, so what should have been there then, Andrew? I guess, I mean, there was, they prolonged and increased the wage subsidy. They did offer some measures for targeted industries. What should have been there at this moment? Like, what did Canada need that it didn't get?
I think, the measures to fight the pandemic itself are all well and good, and indeed the support measures for people getting through it. I think it's looking forward. If they're trying to reassure business and investors, one of the things that can reassure them is some sense of forward motion on coming to grips with the deficit and the debt longer term. That doesn't mean you have to announce everything now, but I think there could have been more work done to spell out the terms of the fiscal guardrails, fiscal anchors. I think there could have been much more work done to say, look, we're going to take the hit on the pandemic, rather than saying, well, maybe we'll skate through on a best case scenario. Just say, look, we're going to have a really tough next couple of months in Canada. The pandemic is going to get much, much worse here. That probably means that the less good case scenario is the real deficit number. Let's just spell that out. If you're going to do a stimulus, why not just say it's going to be $100 billion, we'll do it this much and this much a year, rather than leaving yourself so much wiggle room as to leave people just confused.
I only have about 2 minutes. Althea, you get 1 minute. So why then? Why leave so much wiggle room, as Andrew says?
I think they don't know is the answer to that question. I want to say that I think that all budgets are political documents. They're very rarely like financially maybe to Chantal's point, there could have been more financial certainty. But to me, like all budgets are basically you're targeting who you want to target, and there's a message underneath that. Sure. I think they don't know. The first part of the budget is all about vaccine rollout and kind of protecting themselves against some of the criticism that I think has landed from the Conservatives about how, why is Canada at the back of the line or, not at the front of the line? Why didn't we invest more quickly in rapid testing? Why haven't those tests rolled out? Yeah. Maybe those are not fair decisions for the federal government, knowing that there's a lot of those rapid tests that are actually with the provinces. But I think they're planning for the worst, and she's trying to present a very, very optimistic scenario.
You should see Chantal's face right now. You can't see it, but Chantal has things to say, then I got to
go. Two things. One, this was not a pandemic health plan, so I didn't expect a rollout of vaccines coming from the finance minister. Miscasting here. But the other thing is, to budgets that are only political document, can we go back to the 1995 budget? Chrystia Freeland spent a lot of time talking to Paul Martin, who was hitting a fiscal wall. Yes. That was a budget, not a political document only.
Okay, we got to leave it there, everybody. But guess what? You have to come back on Thursday. We'll have more to talk about then. Thank you. Appreciate it. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. And now let me throw it back to Andrew and Adrian in Toronto.
And next on The National, an old game makes a comeback.
It's your game.
Netflix makes a move and chess comes out the winner.
I'm Jamie Poisson, and tomorrow on CBC's daily news podcast Front Burner, we look at how Canada is preparing for COVID vaccine distribution and whether or not the country's actually ready for it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Chess has seen quite the resurgence this fall, and not just because of the extra time we've been spending at home. A new TV series has triggered a spike in interest in the game, especially online. And as Eli Glasner tells us, it's helping to make it more inclusive, too.
Chess isn't always competitive. Chess can also be beautiful.
Beautiful and now wildly popular thanks to the Queen's Gambit. Netflix says its show about a female chess prodigy is its most watched limited series ever.
Chess really doesn't know any boundaries, so everybody gets to feel some level of connection.
And now, even with chess clubs closed due to COVID, interest is rising.
We have certainly a lot more emails coming in from the mothers that say, can we sign up our child for some chess lessons? People are coming and signing out books, even though we're closed.
But if you really want to play or watch, the action is online.
This is very true.
Players like Andrea Botez and Chi-Yu Zhou are the new faces of the virtual game. Zhou's a Canadian grandmaster who started winning at age 5.
Checkmate. Boom.
For her 80,000 followers on Twitch, she plays bullet chess, a big change from the stuffy matches of Queen's Gambit.
I personally enjoy playing bullet, and I think my audience finds it very engaging because it's so fast-paced.
Do I start now?
With board number 1.
Like the show's hero Beth, she's faced players who didn't take her seriously.
There are definitely times when I've made older boys cry because, I beat them over the board.
Canadian-born Andrea Botez plays games online with her sister.
You think I'm gonna have any mercy?
She loves Queen's Gambit, but can't help critiquing some of the play.
Sometimes it's a little bit silly because the top players in the world are missing a 3-move calculation that's a simple fork, and in my head I'm like, come on, sixth graders are learning this in their chess club.
She too has faced her share of sexism, but it only makes her stronger.
As soon as you can tell they're underestimating you, that's when you put all your focus in the game, and that's the most determined I am to beat them.
It's your game.
And with the success of the show, she expects the ranks of female players will keep growing. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
Next on The National, a picture that says so much about this era. The story behind this moment is next in Our Moment. This photo has now been seen all over the world. It's of Dr. Joseph Varon in Houston, Texas, clutching a patient inside the COVID-19 unit. The man was crying, begging to see his wife. So this image connects, as does the loss and the loneliness and the compassion it reveals. And the story behind that picture is Our Moment.
I usually have media in our unit so people can see what's going on. So I have the photographer following me, and as I'm going inside my COVID unit, I see that this elderly patient is out of his bed and trying to get out of the room, and he's crying. So I get close to him, and I tell him, why are you crying? And the man says, I want to be with my wife. So, I just grab him, I hold him. I did not know that I was being photographed at the time. And he was just crying, and eventually he felt better and he stopped crying. It's very difficult. You can imagine you are inside a room where people come in spacesuits and you have no communication with anybody else other by phone if you're lucky. I mean, it's very difficult. And when you are an elderly individual, it's even more difficult because you feel that you are alone. I was feeling very, very sorry for him. I mean, I was feeling sad just like him. And I was just recollecting all the patients that I've had to do similar things with.
Yeah, so if you look at that picture and you think, gee, that looks pretty unusual. I mean, it is, because it is, of course, in these times, right? But the doctor and the staff say that they're trying to be a bit more human with all of the people they see, although it's hard because there's so many.
It's very hard, and Dr. Varon tells us that he has been working 256 days in a row.
Wow.
So a reminder, please join us tomorrow, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on CBC News Network and CBC Gem for a live interactive special event. It is called, of course, Confronting COVID, the National Virtual Town Hall. You'll also find us at CBC TV at our regular time. Until then, that is a national for November the 30th.